Hello and welcome back to the NFL DFS slate breakdown for Monday night. Once again, we're going to go over the two-game slate. It was a fun one last week, and let's dive into it once again this week. So, we're going to start off, and we will go over the perfect lineup. Now, before we get there, make sure to, like, comment, and subscribe to all our videos. It helps us out a ton. Just gets us, that feeds that algorithm and gets us a little more notoriety and lets us give out more content for free. All right, so the perfect lineup. Last week, the two-game slate, it was a wild one. We had a lot of injuries, so two backup running backs were in the perfect lineup. And then we had Deshaun Watson and Cooper Kupp stack. What was extremely interesting is that we also had the Steelers defense and George Pickens. And then on the other side, Adam Thielen crushed it, and Tony Jones, Chris Olave, and Taysom Hill all made the perfect lineup. So it was an interesting one. There was a lot of salary left over. Lower scores because of the two-game slate. But all in all, pretty interesting lineup. A lot of correlation to it. And that's something that we do need to aim for once again this week. And then on FanDuel, Monday, two-day game slate. One of the things we did talk about last week was that the Panthers had the highest pace of play and they were going super low owned. Sure enough, Bryce Young was able to make the perfect lineup on FanDuel, and then also Adam Thielen was there. Dual backup running backs is just something that's not going to happen very often, but it did. And then wide receiver wise, Chris Olave, George Pickens, two of the best, or three of the best with Cooper in there, and Taysom Hill. So there was plenty of room to get different and, take it down. And we're going to try and find our edges today to do that same. So now let's get into it. Perfect lineup. We're going to go ownership wise straight to the main two-game slate. So, one of the things I noticed right off the bat is Cincinnati is getting a ton of ownership so far in this game. I think it's really interesting. Both games, very similar game totals. 145.5, the other one's 44.5. So there's not a huge discrepancy there. Cincinnati has looked absolutely awful through a couple games now, and Rams have been surprising. Meanwhile, Tampa Bay's been surprising, and the Eagles obviously are good, and we thought they would be. So, looking at ownership, seeing the one team that has been most disappointing being the highest owned is a little interesting for me. So, I think we can probably lean into hoping they fail a little bit. I think there is a real path to that happening. Joe Burrow is a game time decision, but it does look like he's trending to play. He's obviously not going to have as much mobility, but he is still Joe Burrow and one of the better quarterbacks here. So right off the bat, that is my thinking. So now let's go into the quarterbacks a little bit here. Jalen Hurts is the highest owned, no surprise. Burrow is not on this list. If he does play it, people are obviously going to play him. I would expect his ownership, probably to bring down Baker and Stafford a little bit, but Jalen Hurts will stay as the highest owned guy. Now, Jalen Hurts has plenty of different paths to being the best quarterback on this slate, but he's also way, way more expensive. He obviously has his rushing upside. He has very good weapons. Tampa Bay is a pass funnel defense, meaning they let people pass on them or try to get them to pass on them. So I think there's a lot of reason that Hurts is the best quarterback on this, and he's going to have the highest projection by far. I do, however, think there are real paths to Baker or Matt Stafford being the quarterback that gets you that optimal lineup today. One, they're cheap. They have some interesting pass catchers to stack with, and they're going low owned. So I think they're all interesting. If we go to the good old matchups tab here, Mayfield is at the very top. Look, Cousins lit him up. Mac Jones lit him up. Very well, this Eagles pass defense could get lit up again by Baker Mayfield. So I think they are very interesting. On the Cincinnati side, Watson and Jackson both had decent games. Makes sense that Stafford could do it as well. Joe Burrow, he's been bad, and this Rams D has made quarterbacks struggle a little bit. So little interesting going there. Now on the running back side, Eagles situation is very interesting. DeAndre Swift absolutely crushed last week with Gainwell out. I would expect a split between them. Gainwell is going to be playing. But Swift is clearly the better running back. And I hope the Eagles see it because he is who I would want to play in this matchup, especially because Tampa Bay is generally hard to run against, but they allow receiving out of the backfield. And that's how you can beat them. DeAndre Swift is an elite receiver out of the backfield. So I do like him. Now, Joe Mixon, absolutely in play here. He is super high owned. The one worry I have with him is that he's only had 13 rushes a game. Now, he has had a solid amount of targets, so his, total touch volume is in that 18 to 20 range, which we like. But I do worry that he's the highest owned and he's not getting a ton of rushing work for a team that's had trouble to move the ball. Rachaad White on the other side is the RB1 with Tampa. He's absolutely interesting. He's gotten a ton of work. 17 carries, 5 receptions, 17 carries, 2 receptions. So his workload is there. He does have a very tough matchup. He's not going to be able to run the ball very well versus that Eagles front, but he could catch some passes and make some stuff happen that way. Kyren Williams, I am absolutely interested in. Nick Chubb beat him up for 100 yards. Edwards last week had 62 yards and a touchdown. I think you can absolutely beat up the Bengals through the rushing game. And I think Kyren Williams is very interesting with his workload. Week 1, 15 carries, 2 targets. Week 2, 14 carries, 10 targets. So his workload is very similar to Mixon, but he's cheaper and doesn't have as much ownership. So if we go back to the ownership here, we can see what that looks like. Kyren, second highest owned, but White and Swift are going, a fair bit under owned. This Philadelphia running back spot could be an interesting one to target with not much ownership going there. Sean Tucker, I guess you could take some swings at too, being low owned. He did have 8 carries last week and had 7 touches the week before between carries and targets. So he will be involved a little bit. Rashad Penny, I would say, don't bother with, as well as Travion Williams. Williams didn't get much work last week. Now we take it to the wide receiver spot. Look, I think Cincinnati's going over owned. 3 of the 4 highest owned wide receivers are Cincinnati products. I think Tampa Bay receivers are both in a good spot. All at similar ownership, but Philly receivers are kind of going unowned. 20% for Devontae Smith when Hurts is high owned, I think is weird. The other thing is that Quez Watkins is likely out, maybe giving some more passing work to DeAndre Swift, the running back who we talked about. But with Quez out, they already have a slim target tree, and it probably just got even slimmer with him out. I think it does help Goddard. It does help Devontae Smith. It does help A.J. Brown. I think they're all interesting. And this Rams passing game is definitely interesting to me. Puka is going unowned, even though he's absolutely crushed this season. He has 35 targets on the year, ranks third in the NFL, and he's only played 2 games. This guy is going to get targeted again. Once again, he has done well. He's caught his targets. I expect him to do that again. So I think you got to like him. Trey Palmer is a really interesting dart throw at 3.1K. 3 targets week 1, 2 targets week 2. He is involved. He had less targets last week, but his snap count actually went up. So I do, think Palmer at very low ownership is interesting. He can make some big plays happen also. Van Jefferson has been running a ton of routes. He's been on the field a ton, but he only has 9 targets on the year. He is definitely kind of the wide receiver 3 in this offense. Based on targets, but he's out there a ton, and we've seen him produce before, so it wouldn't be that surprising if at low ownership he got something done. So I think my favorite play on the slate at this ownership is Devontae Smith. Do like him quite a bit. Tampa Bay receivers I definitely like as well, and Puka is a big time one for me, especially at that ownership. Let's just go through the tight ends before we go over to ownership, so we don't have to kind of keep switching back and forth. Goddard, highest owned tight end. No surprise here. There is no Quez Watkins. I think Goddard, it lays out very well for him in this spot. The one thing, though, is that the first reads for Hurts is absolutely A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. It could also be Swift this game. So Dallas Goedert could be 3rd or 4th on that list. And at high ownership, might be smart to just get different, At tight end for Cincinnati, Irv Smith is doubtful. I doubt he plays. And so I think it is a little interesting to say go Drew Sample, who, you're getting part of that Cincinnati passing game, but nobody's going there. And he's cheap. So I think that's interesting. Higbee is obviously in play. And Cade Otton has been running a ton of routes. The way you're going to beat this Philly defense is through the passing game. And Otton is a cheap way to get some targets there. He does have 6 targets last week, 3 targets the week 1. So he is getting targeted, and he's rather cheap. So I think he is very interesting. At D, look, if the Eagles are really only 17% owned, I would be all over them. And now let's get over to the matchups. So wide receiver matchups, we'll go by wide receiver. So wide receiver 1, Mike Evans has the best matchup. He is, moderately owned. I think he's in a great spot. You can absolutely beat the Phillies secondary. A.J. Brown is obviously in a great spot. And ownership is going with him. Chase Young is an interesting one. So Samuel and Metcalf both had okay games versus the Rams. But the reason Chase is interesting is he only has 17 targets on the year. He doesn't have a touchdown. This offense has looked horrible. He's super high owned, and Joe Burrow hasn't been any good. So I'm having a trouble wanting to pay up for Chase when there's other options here. Van Jefferson's in a tough spot here. All right, wide receiver 2 wise. Godwin with the best. Higgins is in a very good spot. And Devontae Smith actually is in a decent spot as well. Addison got over. Mooney left the game hurt this game, so I don't think you can, lead into that too much there. I like Devontae. I like Tutu. I like Higgins. I like Godwin. I think the wide receiver 2s are pretty interesting this week. Puka Nacua, love him this week. I will be all over him. I think Trey Palmer is an unowned, interesting spot. KJ Osborne went off. Juju Schuster had 7 targets. I think you can absolutely attack this Philadelphia passing game, and he is an interesting way to do it. Tyler Boyd, I think he's kind of going high owned for what he is in this offense. So we don't have to worry about him. Tight end wise, Otten, lower owned and has a very good matchup. Goddard, highest owned in a decent matchup, not great. Irv Smith is likely going to be out, but you could put Simple in this spot, which the Rams have been very tough to tight end so far. So understand that if you want to go with Simple, it is a dart throw, and there's a reason why he's low owned. So that kind of does it for us today. Quick rundown. I think there is, definitely some interesting plays here. It is going to be fairly easy to get different on this slate. The other thing is that my strategy for the day is probably to go pretty heavy on stacks and hope one of the 4 teams kind of separates and that I pick that team to stack and go heavy on that. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. Make sure you lean into correlation on these 2-game slates, as it is huge and not everybody does it. So it gives you a little edge. Have a good one, guys. Good luck tonight. Hope you win some money. Bye.